We have the flicker of sunlight on steel, the echo of shouted cries and challenges across the battlefield, and Shogun's back on telly as well. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we're talking about Samurai Skirmish wargaming. Hi, I'm Rob Poynton. Thanks for joining me today. Now, you may remember, if you've been following the channel for a while, one of the very first uploads that I put up was about Samurai Skirmish wargaming, something I did back in the day and wanted to get back into. I even went as far as buying some figures, and that's pretty much where it stopped, because of course other projects come along, as happens, and in particular I've been putting a lot of work into the fantasy 10mm setting, the campaign, the Fantastic Battles rule set, and everything else. Anyway, that's all chugging along nicely now, and as I mentioned, Shogun has been streaming. We've been watching that. What a great series. And I had a chat with some of the lads at Bedford Gladiators Club, and they said, yep, they'd certainly be up for a good Samurai Skirmish. So I'm going to paint up those figures that I bought a while back. I've also got some more on order from Dixon's, funnily enough. I've got a Ronin warband and some others turning up, hopefully today or tomorrow. I've got to get all those painted up in time for Monday for the battle. But before I start on that, I thought I'd give you a quick run through the rules that we're going to be using for our game, which is this set, the Samurai Skirmish rules by Sid and Ken Smith, which dates back to, I think it's 1973 and 1974. I'll run through those in a moment. But as I mentioned in that previous upload, back then, I'm talking late 70s, early 80s, samurai figures were fairly difficult to get hold of. And I think most of the ones I've got are from Dixon's. So it's quite nice that Dixon's are still going and I can order some more for them. There were very few samurai rules back then. That was the only one that I can remember. Of course now, as well as a whole load of figures, there are many more rule sets as well, particularly for large scale battles. In fact, we're looking at adapting the Fantastic Battles rule set for use with samurai as well, probably 25 or 28mm. We have already tried it with Ancients and it worked really well. But on the skirmish side, there's quite a few systems out now. I guess the two most well-known ones are Ronin, which is an Osprey book, and Test of Honor as well. Now, I've had a look at those online. I've not really gone into a lot of detail, and I've searched around and found maybe about 8 or 10 other rule sets as well. Some of them what you might call sort of amateur press, self-published things. Some are from larger companies, but there's actually quite a large number of skirmish rule sets out there. But we're going to stick with the Smith version for the moment because that's what I know. We're going to give those a try on Monday. I'll do a battle report on that, and I'm interested to see how they stand up to wargaming after, what, 40 odd years or so. Because as you'll see when we go through, these are very much a 1970s set of rules. And in a way, I quite like that. I suppose it's what I grew up on, if you like. I've played a few games recently, sort of skirmish type games. Probably the one I enjoyed most was Fistful of Lead. That was very good. That was pretty straightforward. That was more my kind of thing. Then we played Fallout as well, which is very good. Again, I enjoyed that. It's a very good game, but that's quite complex. There's a lot of cards, there's different dice, you roll different dice for different things, there's lots of little symbols to learn. And I do find with some modern games, it's not a game unless it comes in a big box. Yeah, there's some figures, but there's also 125 counters, there's 4 decks of cards, there's this, there's that. I understand why companies do that, because obviously if they're asking you for 50, 60 quid or even more, you want something hefty. Whereas a set of rules like this, I mean, what are you going to pay for a printed pamphlet? A £5 perhaps? So I understand it from that angle, but I also like that feel of just having a set of rules. I've got the figures, we've got the terrain, we've got a good set of rules that we can get into, and we just go ahead. I do feel, I've played some other games lately where I felt it's a little bit like playing top trumps, but with figures. You're moving figures around. I didn't feel much involvement with the actual mechanics of the game. Anyway, that's just me, and I'm an old fart, so what do I know? Let's take a look at the rules. Samurai Wargame Rules by Sid Smith and Ken Smith, an LWS production, and LWS stands for London Wargame Section. They brought out quite a few set of rules back in the day, and that day was 1974. My word, 50 years ago. Amazing. So these are very much a set of 70s rules. Of course, the presentation then was a little different. It was not so easy to get stuff printed and published. So we've got this nice spiral binding, table of contents, an introduction. This is set during the period 1100 AD to 1500 AD in Japan, though there are rules for some later editions as well, such as firearms. And we can already tell this is 70s because it uses average dice, something you may not be familiar with. I'm not quite sure what the thinking behind average dice was. I mean, I guess it is what it says in the title. It's to get a sort of average. But they were used quite a lot in old games. I don't really see them now. Perhaps the advent of percentile dice and that kind of thing sort of made them redundant. But anyway, the other very 70s thing that we get is the scales. One figure represents one man, 25mm figures. One period represents 1 minute in actual time, and 1 inch on the table is equivalent to 2.5 yards in reality. A lot of old rules had that. That was almost the first thing you had to decide with your rules, was the scale. So then we're on to the record sheets. We have a record sheet for each character, each figure on the board, and that just details what they are. You've got boxes there, you tick off their ammunition and their wounds. And there's a section here for their movement orders. Also, if you want to use hidden markers, which you can in this, we've got figure identification and the hidden marker identification as well. And the figures are grouped into units, and the unit also has a set of orders given at the start. If you want to change those orders halfway through the game, then you have to get a message from your leader across to that unit. So we've got a selection of warrior types here, and these are all pretty much what you'd expect. We go from the highest being a mounted samurai on a pony with full body armour, armed with musket and sword, all the way down to your ashigaru with no armour, with a pole weapon or sword, and even under him we've got a wagon and a peasant driver. Wagons can play a part in this if you're doing that raiding scenario where you're trying to get treasure or goods from your opponent's houses. We've also got points value there. Now what I'm doing on Monday, I'm just basically collating all the figures I've got together and making two forces out of it. I'm not really balancing out the points at all. Well, each side is going to have even points, but we have a set of rules here. The composition of the daimyos following should be, so you can only really have 20% of your total points as samurai, and so on, which makes historical sense. However, I'm working with what figures I've got, so I'm kind of ignoring that bit. We then get sort of command and control information. We get the command range, which I think is 5 inches, and we get things like samurai can order anyone around. Chugan can never order a samurai around, of course, because that's unheard of. Then we're on to those orders I mentioned earlier. You get your initial orders at the start, and they can be changed during play. From there, we're into turn sequence. Now, one thing you get in these old-fashioned, if I can put it like that, rules, let's say vintage, I prefer vintage, is there's no talk of activation, there's not even talk of any sequence. So there's no mention of, is this an I go, you go setup? Is it simultaneous movement? From what I remember, we played it as simultaneous movement. We go back to our earlier chart. So each figure or each unit is given a simple order at the start of the move. We make a note of that, then everything is simultaneous. So the sequence of action, write new orders, missile fire reactions. There might be forced actions because of that. People might retreat. We get the movement of figures. Then we get the movement of the hidden markers if we're using that option. New sightings and disappearances. So obviously when a hidden marker comes into view, it is revealed, is that actually a figure or a unit, or is it a blank? We get melee, post-melee reactions, and we finish with morale tests. So that's the basic structure of each turn, pretty straightforward. And then it's just details of how all that stuff works. So with sightings, of course, you need a clear line of sight. You can't see people if they're on the other side of a wall or thick vegetation and so on. Then we've got the rules for missile fire. Now, as I said, we have got rules in here for muskets, but I'm ignoring those. We're just going to stick with arrows. So pretty much your standard stuff. Again, there's some limits on who you can and can't shoot at. The ranges are quite short in this, I noticed. So with your bow and your musket, effective is 6 inches, extreme range is 12 inches, and it recommends a 6x4 table. So that seems like fairly short range to me. We'll see how that works out. And it's a usual thing. You've got your variables, your roll your average dice, and you need a score of 3 to 5 to inflict 1 wound. If you get 6 or more, you inflict 2 wounds on the target. And remember from that earlier box, 6 wounds, and you are an ex-samurai. There's that missile reaction. So if you've taken your 3rd wound, or if you've just seen your unit leader killed, there's a missile reaction test to take. And then we're into movement. And again, this seems quite short. Foot figures move 4 inches, mounted figures 6 inches. So, you know, a 6x4 table, you're potentially going to take a little while to get across that. A few variables there if you're going on roads. If you're weaving, that makes you harder to hit with bows, obviously. And then we're into melee. So this is all considered as simultaneous. And basically to get into melee, you just move into base-to-base contact. The nice thing I liked here, samurai and unit leaders must engage in all melees involving their follows where possible. Chugen and Ashigaru will not initiate close combat unless led by their unit leaders. If only things were always like that, eh? There'd be a lot less battles and wars, I would imagine. So it's a similar thing again. We've got our attack value. So if we're an armoured samurai attacking another armoured samurai, we've got an attack value of 2. We have our variables of people got wounds, figures with 3 wounds or more, are we being attacked by 2 or more opponents, and so on. We throw the 2 average dice this time, and again we look up the effect. So the most you can do there with a score of 13 plus is 3 wounds. If you receive more wounds than you inflict, then you're forced back 1 inch from the combat position, and there's the mechanics for resolving that. So you can get forced back into a sort of obstacle, into a wall or something like that. The attacker has the option to follow up, and so on. Death of ponies, well, we don't want to know about that, do we? We'll look at that if we need to. Death of unit leaders. If a unit leader is killed, we throw 2 average dice to see if one of the followers will then take control of the unit. And we've got the scores required for that there. And then we're on to the morale test. This never applies to normal samurai, to be taken for each individual figure on the following occasions. So it can be at the player's discretion if a figure receives 3 or more wounds, if they're engaged in melee with 3 or more wounds, if their unit leader is killed, and if they're Chugen or Ashigaru outside that zone of control we mentioned earlier. Once again, a few variables, simple dice roll, 2 average dice, and we've got everything from carry on with orders. Was that just before carry on screaming? Or we've got retire and routed. If a figure routs and they're blocked by enemy figures, then they will surrender as well. Finally, we've just got a little bit about pursuit there. So if an enemy does rout, they can be chased. That might be voluntary or involuntary pursuit. And of course, the pursuers get an extra hit on their fleeing enemy there. Seems rather unsporting, doesn't it? So that's pretty much it for the rules. We've got a competition scenario at the end. This is what we'll be using on Monday. 6x4 table, an army of 100 points each side. Basically, we've got 4 houses set up on each side, and 1 is selected at random by each force. That is your target force. You've got to get in and raid that house, nick all the good stuff and get away with it. and it's basically whoever manages to get away with the most stuff at the end of the game is the winner. So a straightforward scenario just to get us going. And there's nice rules here as well. So Chugen or Ashigaru can carry 5 points worth of goods. A pony can carry 10. A wagon can carry 15. Samurai refuse to carry any goods. Well, of course they would, wouldn't they? And we finish with an appendix, just a little bit of background and historical information about what samurai were, the sort of weapons they used. Again, very basic, but of course there's tons of reference works you can look at now, either in book form or online. And the appendix 2 here, it just mentions that although this is based for 11 to 1500, you can use it to fight latter periods in Japan and also other nations, for example the Mongols, with a few alterations. So that's where you add your muskets in. You're probably going to have more samurai in your army when fighting against the Mongols, and so on. Oh, and very finally, Appendix 3, just a short glossary of terms there. And that's it. Oh, there we go. London Wargames section. There's some of the other rules they were selling at the time. Napoleonic, ACW, Greek Naval. Oh, that would be interesting to see. And Napoleonic Naval. I'd like to see that one as well. 1970. And look at that. That would have set you back 60p plus 5p postage and packing. Wow, those were the days, eh? So I wonder what happened to London Wargames section. If anyone does know, then please do let me know. But that's it for now. That's our Samurai Wargame rules in a nutshell. That's the rules we'll be using for Monday's game. Then we're just going to set up a simple raiding action scenario just to get everyone in. I think we've got about 4 or 5 players or so. So just as an introductory scenario, something quite straightforward. And as I say, I'm very interested to see how these rules are going to stand up. I have been looking around at other rules as well, and I suspect what will probably happen, as usually does, is I'll select bits and pieces from the various set and we'll put together a homebrew set of rules as well. Because at the end of the day, as they say, we all want a game that suits our particular needs and requirements at the time, and most of these things are very easy to adapt. For skirmishing, I want something that's pretty fast moving. I want something that, as I said, I feel like I'm in the action, but I feel like I have agency as well. If I have to roll to activate characters and they might not activate, or I haven't really got control of this, to me that sort of takes me out of the game a little bit. I prefer something where perhaps I'm a megalomaniac. I have total control over everything. Of course, things can go wrong. That's all part of the fun as well. But if too much control is taken away, I feel like I'm not really involved in the game. Anyway, I've got lots of painting to do, so I'm going to get on with that now. And as I say, keep an eye out for that battle report on Monday. I should be getting that up in the next week. Thanks as always for watching. Thanks again, as always, for all your comments, questions and suggestions. If you do have any good tips for a good set of Samurai Skirmish rules, please do let me know. And if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.